Hello, friends, and welcome to another episode of the 3 Books from Hearts and Minds podcast. I'm Sam Levy with the CCO, transforming college students to transform the world. And of course, I'm here as always with the one and only Byron Borger of Hearts and Minds Books. How are you, Byron?
I'm doing good today. It's great to be with you, Sam. My wife and I are here in Dallastown with our staff here at the bookstore, and I'm in the little corner of our shop. And so if you're tuning in or just listening, we are really grateful. It's a fun little series we're doing here on the podcast, and Sam can tell you all about it.
Yeah, well, we are just a few weeks away from Jubilee 2020, the CCO's Jubilee Conference. If you're listen to this podcast or you follow Byron's stuff, or if you know the CCO, then you're aware of what Jubilee is. And we've been going through some of the books that have both been formative to the Jubilee Conference through the years and that have helped to form students who have gone to Jubilee. Some of these authors have spoken at the conference, some of them many times. Some of them will be there this year even. Some of the authors that we've looked at are books that students have maybe bought at the conference, read, and been shaped by as they live into what we in the CCO call the Jubilee Vision, which is really just this, what we believe is a biblical worldview that tells us that God cares about all of creation, cares about all things, is redeeming all things. And so following Jesus in the world today means following him into our call, wherever that may take us, in our workplaces and our relationships and the various things that God's put on our heart to love and to steward. And these books help to shape us towards that vision, because the Jubilee Conference isn't just about what happens that weekend, but it's about this ongoing journey that we're inviting students into, that we in the CCO are still on, that has been so definitive to what we believe it looks like to follow Jesus. And few people have been as important to the formation of that vision and to just faithfully living out that vision as Byron and Beth Borger and their work with these books and ideas that they get to steward and invite us into.
Well, that was really well put, Sam, except the stuff at the end. I don't know how important we've been, but it has been a journey for us. You know, I was on the first planning committee that helped figure out why we were going to call it Jubilee, how this conference was maybe a little different than other renewal and revival and significant retreats and conferences that people have. We were trying to really do something interesting. And I think it was the second year we did it. The Washington Post did a story. And in those days, I mean, this is the late 70s. There was very little about evangelical Christian faith in the news. The Christian right hadn't made a splash yet. And so people hardly even knew about this born again thing and the Jesus movement. And yet we had this conference for college students to think faithfully about their stewarding the creation. We had Senator Mark Hatfield, who was a Republican senator, but yet was anti-war. He was a Baptist and concerned about peacemaking and didn't go along with the Vietnam War stuff. And so he was legendary as a Republican who stood against Nixon on the Vietnam War stuff. And so anyway, we had Mark Hatfield, who talked about stewarding the creation as a key to understanding the meaning and purpose of our call to image God in the world. And part of that is caring for creation. The Washington Post did a story about us. You know, that these college students are thinking about energy policy and bringing in thoughtful sort of people that can't be put in a box like Mark Hatfield. What a fascinating kind of reputation Jubilee developed in those early years as a conference unlike anything else in the country. We would have people come from Texas or Louisiana and say, we want to duplicate this in our place, but we don't know. How do you know these people that can talk about a Christian view of the butcher, the baker, the candlestick maker, you know, sports figures and physicists and, you know, lawyers and filmmakers? How do you find them? Nowadays, it's more easy, and this notion that God cares about our callings in the world is a little more in the air of religious denominations and even evangelical faith nowadays. But when it started, man, it was fresh and new and newsworthy. So we stand in that legacy, and this year is the 50th anniversary of Jubilee. So Beth and I helped plan it for a while. We were in the committee for a while. Then when we left CCO staff after bringing students there for 3 or 4 years, we started our bookstore. And there was already a bookseller running Jubilee, Radix Books. Wes Severald and Ray Red, my old college roommate, ran the book table for years. And Beth and I would come back from Dallastown and even bring people from here to the conference in Pittsburgh, even though we were not working for CCO and we weren't selling books there. But we came nonetheless just because we loved the vision. And then when Ray and Radix decided to sort of back out of the book selling business, they said, well, why doesn't Hearts and Minds take it over? And we kind of made it a little bigger, a little more broad. And then we got a bigger space. And then we moved to the convention center and they gave us a whole room. And it's now just a huge, huge affair. We plan for weeks ahead and we rent a big truck and it's a big deal for us now, but we've been a part of it for 50 years. So it's exciting to kind of talk about that and remember those times and think about God's faithfulness to whole generations of students that heard an articulation of the faith, like you just said, Sam, about them living into their faith and their careers and their callings because God cares about it all. So it's been a fun ride.
I count myself in that number of a college student who went to Jubilee. My world rocked in a number of different ways, bought books from Hearts and Minds that continued me on that path.
There you go.
And
there you go.
And yeah, so we've got continuing this series with another set of 3 books that have helped to form and have helped that vision be formed in the life of so many from Jubilee. So what's our first book for today?
If you're listening in and not familiar with the Jubilee Vision or what CCO does, look it up online or something. This Jubilee Conference has a real spiffy website and, videos and stuff of the students in their main sessions. But I'm going to talk about 3 books. And I think these 3 books sort of help cut to the chase of what's really distinctive about the CCO. And if you're a CCO worker just listening in, kudos to you for knowing these books and doing this kind of work with the students that you bring to Jubilee. Some of those students, you just grabbed them at the student union and said, hey, want to come and have fun in Pittsburgh? We'll run around town for a couple of days and go to some speakers and sing a little bit. And they're like, whatever, they come. And they may have not heard of any of this. But your student leaders, I'm sure you've talked about these very things with them. So I'm going to name 3 books that have been really important. The first one is by Steve Garber, who used to be the director of the Jubilee Conference for a while. Steve worked for InterVarsity and then he worked for CCO, working largely with graduate students and even some faculty at Pitt and at CMU, Carnegie Mellon University there in Oakland. And he had a very prominent ministry, mostly working with graduate students, particularly then also lawyers in the law school and med students in the medical school. And he helped them integrate a faith into their learning and so forth and did all the Jubilee stuff. And he ran the conference for a while. Steve is just quintessentially a part of the CCO and the Jubilee vision. And he talks about Jubilee everywhere he goes all around the world. He has been leading discussions about visions of vocation was an earlier book, and the seamless life, an earlier book in Singapore and in Eastern Europe. He's got a think tank in the UK that are all working around the ethics of business and stuff. Steve is a mover and shaker and an amazingly gentle, wonderful friend of the CCOs. He'll be at Jubilee this year. However, he wrote his first big book, which was his PhD work at Penn State University in the philosophy of higher education. And what Steve wrote this book called Fabric of Faithfulness. We in the CCU used it in staff training for years. I don't know why we don't anymore, but staff would work with this book together. It's a little challenging. It's a little academic. Stanley Hauerwas, famous professor at Duke, wrote a book on the ethics of community, amongst other things. And he once said, there is no other book I would want to give to my son or daughter going off to college than this book. Well, I don't know, to be honest. Maybe Hauerwas's kids could handle it. I don't know if most 17-year-olds are quite ready for this. But if once you get into college for a couple of years, it really is important. And if you work with young adults, it is essential. Here's the summary of this book. I could talk about it for an hour, but I'll do it real quickly. Steve interviewed people that were in their mid-career, and you've heard me talk about this at this podcast before, who were in their midlife. I ended up being one of them. We had an interview at Geneva College in Beaver Falls, his alma mater. I don't know why we were there, a CCO event, I guess. And he interviews me. I didn't even know he was interviewing me for what would become a book. It was for his graduate or for his master's program or his doctoral program. And he was asking people, what happens when you're a young adult what Sharon Parks calls the critical years. What happens in those years, say 18 to 24, when the most important decisions are made about your life? What you're going to believe, if you're going to go to church, where you're going to live, what you're going to live for, what kind of relationships you're going to develop, what friends you have. The critical years in faith development and psychological development are those years where the key things are decided. Youth ministry is so important, but frankly, kids don't make lifelong decisions when they're 15. They make them when they're 21, particularly for those who go to college. You make friends, you develop beliefs, you learn ideas, you develop a career, and those lifelong goals are set in your young adult years. Well, he was interviewing people that were in their midlife, the beginning of these 40s, and asking them, you made decisions particularly about your Christian faith and the implications of your Christian faith for your life when you were 20 years old. What happened to you when you were in college that made it last? You've been in it for the long haul, that long obedience in the same direction that Eugene Peterson talks about, that long obedience. How is it that your idealism and your vision and your zeal for the kingdom of God, making a difference in all of life, how did that stick with you for decades? Because we know some people come to Jubilee, they sign up for the kingdom, they make commitments to Christ or to Christian ministry or to holistic thinking or to take your faith into the marketplace. They made these kind of rituals at Jubilee where students make these lifelong decisions, and then a decade or two later or a year or two later, they give up. They see how the sausage is made and they get cynical. They get jaded. You can't make a difference. You can't live like this. Maybe they don't even go to church anymore. And so he's asking young people who are in their midlife how it was that when they were 19 or 20, they made lifelong decisions. Almost every single person that told him a story, and I was one of them, ended up saying the same three things. It is just fascinating. So he wrote his dissertation about the kind of knowledge and implications of what higher education can be for lifelong faith development that is enduring. The three things I'll tell you real quick, and he wrote this whole book about these are three things our culture tends not to believe in. Three things many of our colleges don't encourage, even our Christian colleges sometimes. And the three things are this. The first is that you believe that the Christian gospel, as you've described it, Sam, for the Jubilee Vision, is really true. It is not just a quirky kind of unique thing that the CCO proclaims. It's not just sort of a religious conviction that some people that go to church believe, but it really is how the universe works. It's the truest truth of reality. And once you believe that your faith is not just sort of a religious choice in the consumer options of whether you go to church or not, when you go church shopping and buy the religious services you happen to like, that doesn't last. But if you believe this is true truth, you will stick with it for the rest of your life. So it's this sense of the truest truths of the universe and the way the creation is built and the way it is fallen, the way it's wired to be redeemed. That story is really the true story of the universe. So anyway, that was the first thing. The second thing almost everybody said, besides sort of a sense of conviction, was a sense of character, that you didn't just believe this stuff in your head, but you lived it. It's a 24/7 commitment to live out the implications of the gospel for all of life that you do because your heart is in it. So there's a sense of moving from the head to the heart, I like to put it. He doesn't exactly put it that way, but you move from the convictions of the way the universe is structured, that the Christian faith is true, to it is livable. There's a plausibility structure where you're around people that you say, I can dream these dreams. I can live this life. And here's what everybody said. It was surprising to Steve, but every single person had some version of this story, that you came to believe that the Christian faith can be lived out because you saw it in others. You were part of a community of character, and that community primarily was mediated by a mentor. You have an older friend, a coach, a teacher, a traveling philosopher, a CCO worker, a chaplain, a pastor, a friend in the dorm. You had somebody that was walking alongside you and ahead of you to mentor and pass on to you the vision that you can really live out the Christian faith and make a difference in the world. So everybody had a sense of conviction, but everybody moved to character formation. You can be the kind of person to do this, but character formation happens through a mentor. Isn't that interesting? So that was the second thing. The third thing was you developed lifelong friends. You committed yourself to this community of character that was going to shape and form you. You used that language, Sam, in talking about the books that shape and form the CCO. We didn't talk like that before Garber's book. Nobody talked about being formed or shaped until Garber's book said that that happens in formation. This was 25 years ago, that your intellectual and your worldview capacities to think Christianly about all of life are shaped by the people you're around. And you develop friends because you can't do that alone. So you develop certain friends that last. You maybe even move into intentional community together, like Beth and I did with some other friends from the CCO, where we actually formed an intentional kind of gathering where we lived together, shared properties together. Steve even now says you should pick a friend before you pick a home. You pick who you're going to live with before you pick the place. So anyway, those three things, he called them conviction, character through a mentor, and community, are the three things that if you build those into your higher education experience or your campus ministry programming, it will pay off and make a difference for a long haul faith where when kids are all grown up, they're still dreaming the dream and living the Jubilee vision. So Fabric of Faithfulness, the subtitle is Weaving Together Beliefs and Behavior. And you move from the head to the heart and from the heart to the hands, and you do that together. The original version of this book had a different cover, and it was called Weaving Together Belief and Behavior in the Young Adult Years. That was the original title. And it still has this sense that this is the stuff that happens during the critical years that pays off and that yields a life of faithfulness that's lived out over the long haul of your life and the decisions you make in those critical years that shape you for the rest of your life. They took the in the young adult years off the subtitle of the second edition, which frankly I think was a good idea because some people thought it was for, teenagers or something, the young adults, the emerging adults that are 17, 16, 17. It really is more mature and sophisticated than all of that. He tells great stories, he engages philosophers, he talks great literature as he always does, and it's a heck of a book, an important book, but it's not the easiest to read. So I want to lay this down as a key Jubilee text in our 50 years of Jubilee, one of the most important books that have shaped and formed how we think about campus ministry in higher ed at the CCO because of Steve Garber. So that's my first one. Does that all make sense, Sam? Does some of that ring true to your experience of campus ministry when you were a field staff and now that you're supervising other field staff, that these three things about ideas and conviction and mentors and community, that stuff really is making a difference?
Absolutely. I think that was each of those three components were part of my story as a college student and what shaped me so deeply in those years. And those are all part of what we try to do in campus ministry. We're not just kind of trying to download information into students' brains to get them to understand particular things. We're trying to help them to develop this worldview that is rooted in the gospel, and to walk alongside them as a guide and as a mentor, and coaching them along the way and living that out, and to provide them with a community of people who they can do that alongside, and to give them the tools to continue to find those things even as they leave college. And so I think Steve is incredibly insightful. It's all that when it's laid out like that, it seems really simple, almost obvious that those are three things that we all need to be shaped to live a life of faithfulness to Jesus. But it's, I think, deeply insightful. And as you said, not every Christian has those things, and they're so important. I think one of the things that I really appreciate from Steve in that book, and something that I know is one of the phrases that Steve says a lot, is ideas have legs. It's not just about like understanding in our heads certain ideas, but it's what does it look like for those ideas to develop the legs to be lived out actively in flesh and blood.
Yep. One of the keys to that, and Steve writes about that, and he has a brand new book called Hints of Hope. I'll talk about that maybe in a moment, but this brand new book too, he's always talking, even in this one, about what it means to be responsible, that we as humans are called to respond to God's law. God starts the creation. He gives us his image. We're made in his image, but then we have to respond in obedience or not, in life or death. And so we're always responding. And so this notion of responsibility is important for Steve. And Steve says, when you know something biblically in this deepest sense of the deepest knowing of your heart, you learn to care. So to know something truly is to care for it. And to care means to be aware of your complicity or your implication in your responsibility to care for things. So he's finally asking, what do you do with the ideas that you learn in the classroom? What difference does all this make? Are you responsible to live the implications out as ideas grow legs? And you won't do that if you don't really deeply care. So the question is, how do we come to care? How are we shaped to want this stuff? And that happens, of course, through a mentor that gives you the idealistic vision that, yeah, you can actually do this. You can live this way. It's a wondrous adventure. And so it's a building in the fabric of faithfulness. So yeah, that's a profound book. And I hope people know it. And even if you don't work in higher education or have teenage kids, it is really worth reading, even if you're an adult. The second book is also just a wonderful book for anybody, even though it's described for learners, for college students. It was written for college students originally, but I know a local seminary, a UCC seminary over in Lancaster Theological Seminary. It was used in an ongoing adult education class there at the seminary. So it's for almost anybody, even though it was written for college students by Cornelius Plantinga. Plantinga is up in Grand Rapids, Michigan, where Calvin University is. And he originally wrote this as an introduction to what Calvin University is about, college then, Calvin College, and had every fresh first-year student read it. It was sort of an introduction to a Christian worldview and thinking of why we're in college in the first place. Again, CCO has used this book, Engaging God's World, in staff training. For years we used it. And at our famous beach project, the Ocean City Beach Project in Ocean City, New Jersey, where we gather students together for the summer to learn leadership and engagement of the culture. They're doing an experimental program for a month this year at the Ocean City Beach Project. It's a blast. They've used this there in the past. So it's been a seminal and important and sort of quintessential book for the CCO. And I've highlighted it on the main stage even last year at Jubilee. I love this book. It is eloquent. It is thoughtful. It is well written. And here's the deal. Engaging God's World, a Christian vision of faith, learning, and living, gives you what is sort of the story that we've talked about in the last episode. Brian Walsh in Transforming Vision and Al Wolters in Creation Regained talk about how the worldview of the Christian imagination has to be shaped by these biblical components of the Bible story, which is creation, fall, redemption, and final restoration. God made a world that's good. It's really messed up, and Jesus is claiming it again to restore all things. So that narrative should shape how we do higher education, how we as young Christian adults in college should think Christianly about our work. And so this book lays that out. I'll just tell you what the table of contents is. The first is called Longing and Hope. And it describes how young adults have a longing for the world. They want it to make sense. They want their lives to make a difference. Can we even do that in this fallen world? Is there any hope? And so this question of longing and hope is sort of a driving context of the book, that young adults have these unique passions, if you will. We're wired to want purpose and meaning, ambition, and want to make a difference. And yet in a fallen world, we wonder, can you even do that? Is there any hope? Does it even matter? So the first chapter is worth the price of the whole book, and he's kind of naming the way all of us as humans, but particularly those in the emerging critical years, are beginning to shape their deepest desires and whether they have hope or not. And he makes the case that the Christian faith can fulfill those desires and give you that hope for a vocation to live in the world well. So that longing hope is beautiful. Then he talks about creation, fall, redemption. So 3 chapters, creation, fall, redemption. The world is made good and you study it well. It is messed up and you have to study that too. And Christ is making all things new. So we carry his redemptive message into all that we learn in college so we can live it out well. That creation, fall, redemption, 3 chapters are spectacular. They are just like Al Walter's Creation Regained or like Transforming Vision, the ones we talked about in the last podcast, but they are eloquent and caring. He does bring a reformed view to things because he's at Calvin University of all places. So at Calvin, he has to talk about the Catechism of Heidelberg, or the Westminster Confessions, some of those things that are uniquely Presbyterian and Reformed. But I'll tell you what, this book is good for anyone. It is really powerful stuff. The final chapter is called Vocation in the Kingdom of God. He introduces the theme of the kingdom, that's the rubric the Bible uses to capture the way this story flows together, the good creation that's so wrecked and yet being redeemed by the Lord Jesus in his kingdom coming on earth as it is in heaven. Well, how do we step into our particular role in that symphony of mission, in that kingdom of God vision? Well, we find our own vocation. We find what we're called to do, the little role we play. And that's what college is an opportunity to do, to learn and study and figure out what you're all about. So anyway, this book is well written, well conceived, just a beautiful summary of much that the CCO believes. The Longing and Hope chapter, the Vocation and Kingdom of God chapter that frame the book, and then the little Creation, Fall, Redemption chapters in the middle make it just superb. I would hope that every student would get this stuff in their bones and get it well. It's a beautiful book and says a lot about what the CCO is all about. He's a good writer. Every year at Jubilee, many years at Jubilee, I talk about his book called Not the Way It's Supposed to Be, which is the best book on sin and the fall that I know of, too. For anybody that wants to read a little bit about that one slice of it, he has a whole book just on that. It's a gem. But this engaging God's world, this Christian vision for faith and learning and living, that's a gem. Well, look, I'm going to tell in our remaining time here about one more. Can I just give the big drum roll here for one of my all-time favorite books? Absolutely. I have to admit, I don't always admit this, but it's dedicated to me. It's one of the great honors of my life that my two friends that wrote this next book dedicated it to me for some reason. I don't know why, but my name's on the front page. It's the dedication page. And so I got to talk about it, man, because I love this book. They did me well. It is by Don Opitz and Derek Melleby. Don and Derek are amongst my best friends, and they both got their heads together and wrote Learning for the Love of God, a student's guide to academic faithfulness, because they thought that there needed to be a follow-up to the good stuff Garber kind of gets at in that big picture, and to the theological work of Engaging God's World or Transforming Vision or Creation Regained that lay out the kind of framework. They say, okay, what do we do now that we get into the classroom? How do students learn to love God with all their mind? How do they really think Christianly about the content of their studies? I mean, let's face it, that's why students go to college. There's lots of other co-curricular stuff and relational stuff and finding a boyfriend or a girlfriend and finding a church, and there's all kind of great stuff to do at college. But let's face it, the role of college is primarily going to class and studying some stuff and getting a degree in something. And so how do you do that to the glory of God? The Bible says to do whatever you do to the glory of God. What's it mean to go to class for the glory of God? Well, anyway, they wrote a whimsical, fun book full of stories. I would like to say it's an easy read. It is not simplistic. And so don't think, oh, this is beneath me. This is a book that every college student should own. Every college student should read. Listen to what Jamie Smith, who's a philosopher after all, listen to what Jamie says. What does discipleship have to do with learning? How do I follow Jesus as a student? What does the Lord require of me at university? This marvelous book answers just these sorts of questions. It's a one-of-a-kind, an expansive vision of Christian learning written not for professors, but for students. Best of all, this is a book that can profit students in any educational context, secular or religious. Buy a box of these and give them to every high school senior you know who's going off to college. So anyway, even Jamie thinks this is the best thing you should give out to everybody. Begin to ask those deeper questions of what it means to think Christianly in the classroom. The chapters are fun. It's a wide-eyed book full of learning, full of love, full of grace, full of funny stories, and a serious call to buckle down and take your academic career seriously. A couple of old timers listening into this podcast, if there's anybody out there, might remember the original version of this book. It had a different cover and a different title. It was called The Outrageous Idea of Academic Faithfulness. They changed the title and gave it this new Learning for the Love of God title, which was probably for marketing reasons a good idea. Learning for the Love of God says it better. But the outrageous idea of academic faithfulness, we have just a minute. I'll tell you where that title originally came from. There was a book years ago, it's still in print, I still take it to Jubilee every year, by George Marsden, the Christian philosopher, about thinking Christianly about higher education. It was sort of a history of higher education. At the end of that, he's a historian. At the end of that history book, he has a substantial postscript about what it means that he is a Christian, and his Christian faith colors his philosophy of doing history, his historiography. The philosophy of history is uniquely Christian, and he had that lens which caused him to study his topic in that particular way. He just put his cards on the table, little postscript, Oxford University Press, major book, got lots of good reviews. But in the New York Times book review, the book raved about this history of higher education that the historian George Marsden did. But then they said, there's this odd postscript where he talked about his religion, and like, who cares about that? It was, keep it to yourself. It's just outrageous that he would think there's some reason to talk about his faith at the end of this book. They called it an outrageous idea. Well, Melleby and Opitz were inspired because the next book George Marsden did was called The Outrageous Idea of Christian Scholarship. That he said the New York Times thinks this is outrageous, that we Christians have a unique approach to our scholarship, that we want to do scholarship Christianly to the glory of God. We want to think Christianly about the presuppositions of every discipline. I'm a historian. I do it in history. But then he talked about other people, scientists and others that do this. Even I think in the original manuscript mentioned the Jubilee Conference where young adults go to learn to do this stuff. That book came out from Oxford University Press, The Outrageous Idea of Christian Scholarship. And this is, in a certain sense, a easier version for undergraduates of that academic book about outrageous ideas that George Marsden wrote. Isn't that interesting that the Times mocked his outrageous idea? He wrote a book about it, and then our CCO guys, the dynamic duo of these two guys said, we got to tell that story for undergrads, for 20-year-olds that want to have an outrageous plan. So they called the book The Outrageous Idea of Academic Faithfulness for Christian Undergrads. And nobody got that it was outrageous. Nobody liked the idea. They didn't know what academic faithfulness was. So they changed the title. It's now called Learning for the Love of God, A Student's Guide to Academic Faithfulness. And it's one of my all-time favorite books. Highly recommended it. They wrote it for Jubilee, out of the Jubilee experience, having worked with CCO kids and students. And they put this easy-to-read volume together that to this day is life-changing. I think it is so, so good. And I am happy to tell people about it now. Have you used that one, Sam? You've read that.
Sure have. Read it myself, read it with a lot of students through the years. It's a great tool in our tool belt. And I think that helping college students understand why they're called to faithfulness as students, not just people who happen to be in the classroom, but in their academics itself, is just going to help shape them into people who then can apply that same lens to what it means to be faithful in XYZ, whatever it is that they're doing.
Let me read just a paragraph from near the end of this. It's in an appendix, actually. They have a little liturgy for learning, a little responsive reading. They have a collection of ideas that they garnered from students at a Jubilee workshop when they were doing the second edition of this book. They gathered about 200 students together at Jubilee and asked them questions, and they have the report of that in here. But in this appendix, they talk about forging wonder. They say the world has become flat again, or at least many people live as if it is, and that's too bad. A flat world is boring. Of course, it isn't really flat. It's deep and wide and bumpy and mysterious and anything but boring. At the beginning of this book, we talked about an outrageous adventure. We were trying to appeal to your desire to jump into something exciting. However, seeing you just become a thrill seeker isn't what we have in mind. Rather, we want you to enjoy college, to enjoy friendship, to enjoy learning, and to enjoy the Lord of all these things. The right mix of curiosity and imagination, what we would call wonder, that we want you to experience, and we want you to think that you want that too. We think that delight is a good place to start. Delight in being a college student. Delight in those friends that God brings into your life. Delight in the place where you study. Delight in your field of study. They think that we can be purified and strengthened and our faith can come alive when we just learn to delight in the tasks God has given us. And for college students, a good chunk of that is reading and learning and being in relationship with others as you serve God as a student. Take delight in being a student, my friend. And if you're a CCO worker, tell your students that this is an adventure and it's full of wonder and joy. That's really the point of this learning for the love of God.
Fantastic. Well, three more books that have been so important to us in the CCO and at the Jubilee Conference, and so many people seeking to live out that vision in their life. So thank you so much for tuning in. We'd love to hear from you. Let us know what you're reading and what you think of it. Tell your friends about us. Share this podcast with others and order these books. Remember that you can get 20% off of all books that you order from this episode. Just let Byron know that you heard the podcast. The link is the first link in the episode description to place an order with Hearts and Minds for these books or others. So we appreciate you, and we hope you have a great day and a happy reading. For Byron, Hearts and Minds Books, the CCO, this has been another episode of the 3 Books from Hearts and Minds podcast. Thanks, friends.